Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Richard M. Dick Brewer, who is one of the lesser-known figures in the Lincoln County War, and yet he was actually pretty important to the war itself, and also he was killed in a pretty strange way. So let's talk about how this happened today on this channel. Richard M. Brewer was born in St. Albans, Vermont, on May 29, 1850. But when he was still just a small child, he moved with his mother and his stepfather to Boaz, Wisconsin, where he grew up and worked as a farmer. Later on, he moved to Missouri, and then finally, in 1877, he moved to Lincoln County, New Mexico, where he homesteaded a ranch near the town of Capulan. There, he became a farmer and a cattle hand, and he seems to have been well liked. A contemporary described him as a man of more than ordinary intelligence, temperate in all things, and possessed of that quiet dignity which ever attends a man of strict integrity. Brewer himself was a deputy sheriff and a member of the state militia, and so it probably wasn't long before he met Lawrence Murphy, who was a major figure in the Lincoln County War, and the richest man in Lincoln County. Brewer had a good reputation, and so Murphy hired him in January of 1871 to be his private detective and bodyguard. But Brewer didn't stay in that job for very long. In February of 1878, John Tunstall, who was another major player in the Lincoln County War, was murdered near the community of San Patricio. It's now called San Patricio, but back then it was just called San Patricio. Tunstall was gunned down while working on his horse, saddling it in front of his ranch. When Tunstall died, the entire community was shocked because he was known for his integrity and his fairness. And so, a few days after the murder, when District Sheriff William Brady called together a posse to hunt down the killers, Brewer left his job with Murphy and joined the Tunstall faction as a cattle foreman and was placed in charge of the Tunstall Ranch. While serving in this position, Brewer led a deputized posse which became known as the Lincoln County Regulators. This group of men set out to find Tunstall's murderers. The Lincoln County Regulators included Brewer, Billy the Kid, Frank McNabb, Charlie Boder, Tom Pickett, and John Middleton. The Regulators were actually successful in finding and killing two of Tunstall's suspected killers, S.B.R. Rawls and Jose Maria Herrera. But after the killing of Rawls, tensions rose within the ranks of the Regulators, as there were some who wanted to kill every member of the McSween gang like Billy the Kid, and others who wanted to bring the killers to justice in a lawful manner such as Brewer. After killing Rawls, the Regulators' next target was said to be Buckshot Roberts, who was a friend of the McSween brothers and also a prime suspect in the murder of Tunstall. Buckshot Roberts was a professional bounty hunter and killer. He was considered by many to be the best shot in the West. And in fact, a story goes that he was once paid $5,000 to shoot and kill a bear that was plaguing prospectors near Georgetown, Colorado. Roberts went into the hills and spent 3 days tracking the bear. He finally found the animal drinking at a small stream and shot the bear as it came up out of the water. The bullet hit the bear right between the eyes and dropped it dead in its tracks. Upon hearing this feat, the $5,000 fee was immediately paid to Mr. Roberts. I don't know if that story's true or not, but it's a hell of a story nonetheless. So anyway, Roberts was tracking the Regulators who were traveling north from Las Vegas, New Mexico. The Regulators were headed toward Fort Sumner, which was the home base of the Tunstall forces under the command of Major L.J. Bracey. As the Regulators rode north, Roberts followed behind them. He kept them in sight, but he didn't attack them. On 4th April 1878, Roberts finally got word that the Regulators had stopped at a place called Blazer's Mills, which was on the Rio Bonito near the present-day San Patricio, New Mexico. Roberts rode hard and reached the area late that evening. Roberts could see the camp of the Regulators across the river, but he knew he couldn't attack them at this time. As night fell, Roberts crossed the river and walked until he was close to the Regulators' camp. Then he stopped and built himself a small fire and made himself a meal. When Roberts finished eating, he started to make his way back to his horse. He hadn't gone far when he heard the sound of voices. The men in the camp were now lighting their campfire and getting ready to eat. Roberts needed to get away, and so he ran for his horse. The men in the camp saw Robert's horse whinnying and kicking, and so they grabbed their rifles and started shooting at the horse. Roberts barely managed to climb onto the horse before he was hit by 2 of the bullets. Roberts fell to the ground, but he managed to ride his horse back across the river. The Regulators were now calling out to each other and yelling for Roberts to come back. They were trying to flag him down, but Roberts wasn't stopping. He was in too much pain. When Roberts was wounded, he knew he had to get out of there quickly, so he kept urging his horse onward. He urged the horse past the small corral and outhouse that was at the edge of the camp and into the safety of the hills. Roberts slid off of his horse, propped himself against the outhouse, and that's when he realized he had been hit in the shoulder. And then he looked down and realized that he was bleeding pretty badly. Roberts stayed hidden at the outhouse for a couple of hours, hoping that the Regulators would leave, but they didn't. At around 8:30 that night, Roberts heard the Regulators approaching the outhouse. They were talking about what they were going to do with the killer. They didn't know that Roberts was hiding inside of the outhouse, and so Roberts grabbed his rifle and slipped it through a crack in the door. He then waited for the Regulators to get closer. When they were right outside of the outhouse, Roberts fired. His first shot hit Richard Brewer right in the chest. Brewer stumbled backward. Roberts fired again and hit Brewer in the shoulder. Brewer crumpled to the ground. Roberts fired a 3rd time and hit Brewer in the side. Brewer tried to crawl away, but he collapsed after taking just a few steps. Brewer was dead. The rest of the Regulators were scared off by the gunfire. Buckshot Roberts survived the attack and lived until 1907, dying of cancer. He was buried in the Masonic Cemetery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now, earlier in this video, I told you that Brewer's job was to track down the killers of Tunstall. Well, this isn't entirely accurate. Yes, Brewer did lead a group that hunted down the killers of Tunstall, but he didn't choose to do this. He was basically forced to become a regulator when Tunstall was killed. You see, Tunstall had been a good friend of Brewer's, and in fact, Brewer had worked on Tunstall's ranch for about 2 weeks before the Lincoln County War broke out. In addition, Brewer had helped Tunstall hide out from the McSweeney gang after Tunstall and his associates had robbed the McSweeney brothers' payroll train. But Brewer's association with Tunstall caused tension with Brewer's employer, Lawrence Murphy. Murphy had employed Brewer as his bodyguard and private investigator, but he was suspicious of Brewer's relationship with Tunstall. When Tunstall was killed, Brewer quit his job with Murphy, went to the Tunstall funeral, and helped bury his friend. The Lincoln County Regulators were formed soon thereafter, and Brewer was put in charge. Brewer was actually reluctant to accept this responsibility, but he felt that he had no choice. He was quoted as saying, "I did not want to go on the warpath, but when a man has gone as far as I had, he has but one thing to do." Now, throughout the Lincoln County War, Brewer seemed to be the voice of reason amongst the Regulators. He believed in bringing Tunstall's killers to justice, but he didn't believe in killing everybody associated with the McSween gang. And he especially didn't believe in simply killing anyone without giving them a trial. He also strongly disagreed with Billy the Kid's assessment of the situation, which was that the entire affair was a civil war and that they might as well just kill everyone connected to the opposing faction. Brewer really believed in doing things right and following the law. After Brewer was killed, his body was taken back to Lincoln and hung in the jail yard. His head was cut off and hung from the gallows. It was later buried in an unmarked grave. All right, everyone, that's today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.